Hello again, and welcome to Aviation News Talk, where we talk general aviation with relevant news and flying tips for pilots and student pilots to help keep you safe. I'm Max Truscott. Now, we have a very full show today. After the news, we'll be talking with Rich Pickett, who is the safety officer for Angel Flight West, about Angel Flight West and their approach to safety. Later, we have tons of your emails and questions you've sent in. Thanks so much for sending those, as I love hearing from you and sharing it on the show. Last week in episode 211, we talked with Seth Lake about risk management. So if you didn't hear that episode, you may want to check it out. And if you saved a couple bucks shopping for Black Friday or Cyber Monday, boy, I hope you'll consider using some of those savings to help support this show, as we are listener-supported and still ad-free. You can sign up as a member at aviationnewstalk.com/awesome, and I'll read your name on the show. This week in the news, a mass shooting was avoided at the largest aviation university in the U.S. An Indiana pilot was arrested at the scene after crashing his airplane. Garmin and Dynon are slowing shipments because of the chip shortage. And an airline employee became an inadvertent stowaway and ended up in another country. All this and more, and the news starts now. From generalaviationnews.com, attempt to take a selfie leads to ditching in open water. The student pilot reported that while attempting to take a picture of himself, he accidentally moved the fuel shutoff switch to the off position in the Quicksilver. The engine experienced a complete loss of power. He initiated a forced landing into open water near Puerto Rico and was rescued by boaters. The airplane sustained substantial damage to the wing and the structural tubing of the fuselage, while the student pilot sustained minor injuries. Probable cause, the student pilot's inadvertent movement of the fuel shutoff switch to the off position while attempting to take a picture of himself, which resulted in a total loss of engine power due to fuel starvation and a subsequent ditching in open water. So hey, let's be careful out there when we take those selfies. From avweb.com, this is pretty serious. Police say student planned a massacre at Daytona's Embry-Riddle University. Police in Daytona Beach say 2 Embry-Riddle students likely prevented a bloodbath at the local campus when they reported some disturbing social media posts from a fellow student. When officers intercepted 19-year-old John Argus Haggins outside his home on Thursday, they found a folding rifle with a scope, 6 magazines, and more than 800 rounds of ammunition in his backpack. Quote, the plan was he was going to leave his apartment. He was headed over to Volusia Top Gun to practice, and then he was headed to Embry-Riddle, said Police Chief Jakari Young. It appears Haggins sold his vehicle to purchase that gun and ammunition. He was loaded for bear. He was prepared. Police allege Haggins picked the last day of the school term to carry out the plot because it was exam day and the college was guaranteed to be packed with students. Haggins, who has a private pilot certificate, was enrolled in the aerospace science program and was apparently failing at least some of his classes. When he posted pictures of his recently acquired Keltec Sub 2000 gun with a caption that he, quote, finished his school shopping, unquote, and made other posts referencing the 1999 Columbine High School massacre that claimed 15 people, his fellow students alerted campus security, who told the police. Haggins faces a long list of charges. From FlyingMag.com, the FAA and the Army are investigating a low flyover during an NFL game. A military helicopter flyover at a recent Tennessee Titans football game in Nashville is under investigation by the FAA and U.S. Army officials after the 4 combat aircraft flew low over a stadium filled with spectators. Apache, Black Hawk, and Chinook helicopters were flown by the Combat Aviation Brigade of the 101st Airborne Division from Fort Campbell, Kentucky, during the November 14th game as part of a Salute to Service event. In video taken from a cockpit, a helicopter approached the stadium scoreboard and appeared to dip into the arena below the level of the upper rim of the stands filled with spectators. The team posted the video on its Twitter feed, and it was later retweeted by the 101st Airborne Division. Comments from fans online indicated not everyone was excited about the close-in view of combat aircraft in flight. Quote, altitude was concerning as I stood and watched from the top row of the stadium, said one fan in a tweet. I was above these guys. I had a mini heart attack. More like a fly-in than a fly-over, said another. Official scrutiny into the event, and whether any FAA or U.S. Army safety regulations were broken, did not come, however, until 2 weeks later, following a series of investigative reports by a local news station. The FAA said it was following up with the military about the flyover. By Thursday, the FAA had launched an official probe. Quote, the FAA is investigating this incident. We do not comment on pending investigations, the FAA told Flying. The Army has also opened up a formal review of the incident. Retired Aviation Inspector Larry Williams told the Nashville news station he had never seen a flyover that low and that had the pilots not been in the military, they likely would have had their licenses suspended or revoked. From avweb.com, Kentucky airport clobbered by tornadoes but escaped without loss of life. Kentucky was hard hit by tornadoes that cut a 220-mile wide swath on Saturday, December 11th. The final death toll was 78 people. By comparison, Danville-Boyle County Airport, that's KDVK, was lucky with no injuries despite a direct hit from one of the twisters. Even though 13 aircraft were destroyed when 18 T-hangars were demolished by the storm, the airport's Facebook page wrote, "No injuries and no deaths. This was our worst fear upon entering the damage zone this morning. Materials can be replaced, but the loss of loved ones can't." The airport's operation manager, Nick Barker, told AOPA on Monday that though the airport was open for business as of now with the runway operational and fuel available, there remained a mountain of work to return the facility to normal. "It's still a complete mess," he said. Luckily, many of the airport's buildings and associated infrastructure were spared. From GeneralAviationNews.com, Dynon halts production on experimental displays. Due to supply chain issues, Dynon Avionics will be unable to ship or manufacture experimental Skyview HDX, Skyview Classic, and Skyview SE displays. In a December 16th email, Dynon officials report, quote, "The current sustained global supply chain crisis has seen us face increasing supplier decommitments and dramatically increased delivery times, impacting our ability to keep critical components in stock. This, along with increased customer demand," and it says that 2021 was a record year at Dynon, "means we have challenges delivering some products in the coming months." Officials report they have found some alternative for many components, often at much higher prices. However, there are components critical to experimental Skyview displays that are not available at all right now at any cost, they said. "Our engineering team is working aggressively through the holidays to finish changes to Skyview's design to mitigate this issue," the email continues. "At this time, the earliest date we estimate a return to production is February 1, 2022. As this is a dynamic and challenging time, this date is subject to change. Due to similar shortages, other Dynon products may have increased lead times," officials noted. However, all non-display products remain in production at the moment, and the vast majority of products are available for immediate delivery, they said, noting they continue to accept orders for all products. Now, coincidentally, I was talking about 2 weeks ago with a local Garmin dealer in Southern California, and he mentioned that he'd received notice that they would not be shipping new orders for many of their aviation products through about May of 2022 because of supply chain-related issues. A post on the EuroGA.org forum confirms this and says, "Garmin just issued an email to its dealers that effectively suspends the shipment of some of its products that were ordered on or before September 1st, 2021. I ordered a GTN 750 XI on September 1st. It was to be shipped the end of this month on November 29th, 2021. Shipments have been running 12 to 14 weeks for new orders, and some dealers were willing to pay over dealer cost to complete shipments. My GTN 750 XI is now scheduled for April of 2022. And apparently it quotes from that email and lists the products which are impacted by these new supply chain constraints, including the GTN 750 XI, all variations, the GTN 650 XI and 635 XI, all variations, and the GTX 345, 345R, and 45R series. From AOPA.org, MyGoFlight CEO Charlie Schneider has died following the December 16th crash of a Cirrus SR22. Early reports indicated that the Cirrus was on approach to McGee-Tyson Airport in Knoxville, Tennessee when it encountered difficulty. The CAP's ballistic parachute was deployed, but the airplane crashed and was destroyed by fire. Schneider died after being taken to a hospital, and the other occupant remains injured. Schneider, a pilot and software engineer, established MyGoFlight products, and the company has been selling innovative, high-quality lines of merchandise for GA airplanes for several years. These include power systems, cockpit mounts, luggage, flight bags, iPad cooling systems, and most recently, the company's Sky Display Heads-Up Display, or HUD. Although final accident reports will require time for analysis of the events surrounding the crash, an early assumption is that Schneider was demonstrating the Sky Display and encountered wake turbulence. And I've read comments online from people who've analyzed the path of the Cirrus and an A320 which was landing ahead of the Cirrus. The A320 passed over the Cirrus crash site on short final about a minute and 23 seconds before the Cirrus arrived at that point, and the A320 was 300 feet higher than the Cirrus when it arrived at that point. As we talked about in episode 138, wake turbulence descends at about 250 to 300 feet per minute, so indeed it's highly likely that the Cirrus encountered the A320's wake turbulence. The crash site was right where the base leg being flown by the Cirrus intersected the final to 2-3 right. The Cirrus was relatively low at that point and most likely pulled the parachute below the recommended minimum altitude. It crashed into a construction site for an Amazon warehouse being built that was pointed out to me when I flew over it just a week before the crash when I was in Knoxville. A construction water truck was on site and immediately began pouring water on the aircraft, which was on fire. And our hearts go out to the families of those involved in the crash. From avweb.com, GA Group's appeal to FAA administrator to block ban on 100 low-lead fuel. A consortium of 5 aviation advocacy groups has sent a letter to FAA Administrator Stephen Dixon urging the agency to, quote, take action on what the associations characterize as Santa Clara County's rushed decision to ban the sale of 100 low-lead as of January 1, 2022. The letter states in part that the FAA should turn to its aviation safety mandate to prohibit individual airports from interrupting the availability of 100 low-lead and stifling the cooperative industry government effort to safely transition the entire GA fleet to unleaded fuels. The letter further cites the risk of misfueling, calling the mandate to mitigate such risk vital to public safety for pilots and passengers and for the people and property on the ground during this transition. The letter was signed by leaders of AOPA, EAA, NBAA, GAMA, NADA, and the Helicopter Association International. To date, unleaded fuels remain uncertified for many aircraft with high compression engines. According to the letter, such aircraft burn 75% of the 100 low-lead fuel currently sold in the U.S. Many of these engines are not approved to use unleaded fuels currently available in the marketplace of the association. Those that are approved to use a lower octane unleaded formulation must still obtain an STC to legally use the fuel. This can create a dilemma and risk to pilots who land at an airport at which only a lower octane fuel is available than what they require to fly safely, according to the statement. From avweb.com, FAA agrees to keep Registry open for 2021 11th hour transactions. Influence from the NBAA and GAMA, among others, is credited with convincing the FAA to keep its Oklahoma City aircraft registry staff on duty on New Year's Eve, albeit with limited personnel. Due to New Year's federal holidays falling on December 31st, because January 1st falls on a Saturday, there was concern that large numbers of critical transactions would be stuck in holiday limbo. NBAA Senior Director of Public Policy and Advocacy Scott O'Brien said aircraft buyers and sellers are going to need every day of the calendar year to finalize aircraft transactions, considering the value of the aircraft. Not being able to complete even a small number of transactions in 2021 has a significant impact on a manufacturer's bottom line. GAMA pointed to complications due to supply chain issues, saying that manufacturers have several dozen aircraft slated for delivery in the last week of December. We know the interest of the customers to have a new aircraft with them before the end of the year for tax planning purposes, said Jens Hennig, GAMA's Vice President of Operations. If parties are closing a transaction the last week of December, their best bet is to close on December 29th or 30th, said Scott McCreary, an attorney at McAfee & Taft in Oklahoma City. He said, if they have to close on the 31st, the FAA has provided us an opportunity to take documents related to an ownership transfer and submit them to the filing bin at the FAA Public Documents Room during normal business hours. NBAA noted, however, the FAA will not actually process the documents submitted on December 31st, so parties will not be able to obtain a flywire, import-export an aircraft, renew an aircraft registration, or obtain a unique authorization code for purpose of making registrations on the International Registry. Those tasks will be completed after the holiday weekend. And this is a big deal for buyers of used aircraft as well, particularly those who are interested in taking a tax deduction in calendar year 2021. All of the transactions to close that sale have to be completed by the end of the year. From carscoop.com, justice served, ? A YouTuber sentenced for speeding in Top Gear-inspired video. In March, David Murray and Timur Kaharov, who is described in the story as an airline pilot, decided to drive from their Scottish homes to North Wales to test out their Porsches. The two 30-year-olds did over 100 miles per hour and filmed their antics for their YouTube channel Vehicle Villains, which landed them in hot water with the authorities. The two men were charged with dangerous driving and were handed an 8-month prison sentence, suspended for 12 months. The video, which the court heard was influenced by Top Gear, was posted online where it was spotted by an inspector from the Greater Manchester Police Force. The pair were on the way to a track day but had decided to set off a day early and head to North Wales. They initially headed to the Evo Triangle, a series of roads that the car magazine has popularized. The video shows Murray in what appears to be a yellow Porsche 718 Boxster and Gaharov in a white Porsche 911 GT3 attacking the Benz in anger. The 718 Boxster reached 116 miles an hour, while the GT3 hit 105 miles per hour on public roads. Gaharov, an airline pilot, was said to have displayed misplaced enthusiasm and is said to be extremely appalled at his own behavior. Meanwhile, in court, Murray said he was aware of what he had done, quote, the stupidest thing he has ever done in his life. The aggravating factor is the filming of the driving, said the judge. It may not have been your intention to encourage others to come to Snowdonia and drive in a dangerous manner, but that's what you did, she said. In addition to the suspended prison sentences, both were handed 18-month driving bans and must retake their tests before getting their licenses back. Moreover, they will have to serve 200 hours of community service and pay $910 of cost and a victim surcharge. The convicted pair have since both sold their Porsches. No word on how the airline is viewing this pilot's conviction. From WTHR.com, Ultralight pilot lands in jail after crash in northern Indiana. Indiana State Police arrested a man for operating while intoxicated after he crashed his Ultralight in northern Indiana last week. Around 4:40 p.m., Trooper Scott Hipsher and officers with the St. Joseph County Police Department responded to reports of a single-engine plane that had crashed. When officers arrived, they found an Ultralight had crashed at the entrance of a subdivision. The operator of the Ultralight was not injured in the crash, but police said he showed signs of impairment. The operator of the Ultralight, Joseph Kroll, failed to field sobriety test at the scene of the crash. After being medically cleared, Kroll also had a chemical test done at a local hospital. Kroll was arrested on operating while intoxicating charges and is being held in the St. Joseph County Jail. And finally, from paddleyourown.canoe.com, baggage handler falls asleep in cargo hold and wakes up in different country. A baggage handler took a nap in the belly of an aircraft that was preparing for departure and ended up in a different country after he was accidentally locked inside the plane's cargo hold. The unnamed and thankfully unharmed baggage handler was discovered by airport workers only after the aircraft landed, following a 3-hour flight from Mumbai, India to Abu Dhabi in the UAE. Medical services were immediately called, but it was quickly determined that the baggage handler had survived his unexpected trip without injury. The cargo hold of most aircraft aren't routinely heated unless live animals are being carried. Sadly, pets have sometimes perished in flight when the cargo hold heat is accidentally left off. The Directorate General of Civil Aviation confirmed the incident on board Indigo Flight 6C-1835 on December 12th, saying the baggage handler only woke up once the cargo hold door was closed and the plane started to taxi for takeoff. There is no way to open the cargo hold from the inside and no method of communication between the cargo hold and the flight deck. Once cleared by the immigration officials, the illegal entrant was allowed to fly back to Mumbai on the same plane, but this time in the passenger cabin of the Airbus A320. It's not clear why the baggage handler decided to take a nap in the cargo hold, but the flight is scheduled to depart at 2:25 a.m., so fatigue could well have been a factor in the incident. Unfortunately, the baggage handler and his colleagues who failed to realize he was still in the cargo hold have been suspended pending the outcome of an investigation. Well, that's the news for this week. Coming up next, a discussion with Angel Flight West Rich Pickett, and then your emails and questions, all right here on the Aviation News Talk podcast. And now let me tell you a little bit about Rich Pickett. Rich is the safety officer for Angel Flight West. In the past, he's worked as a TV weatherman, a detective in Boulder, Colorado, a computer administrator at Princeton University, and more recently as the senior director and CIO in the Enterprise Technology Services Department at San Diego State University. And now here's our conversation with Rich Pickett. Well, Rich, welcome to the show. Great to have you here.
Oh, thanks, Max. Really appreciate you taking the time so we can chat about Angel Flight West.
Well, for folks who aren't familiar with Angel Flight West, just tell us a little bit about the organization and its mission.
Sure. There are a number of organizations around the country called public benefit organizations. And Angel Flight West is one of those organizations, and we're part of the entire Angel Flight organization that spans the country, including Alaska and Hawaii. Angel Flight West, we have our geographic area is basically from Colorado westward, including Alaska and Hawaii. And our entire purpose is to provide free transportation for individuals, children and adults, have serious medical conditions to get to their destinations for their appointments and home. We also do things such as what we call the blood transportation, where blood banks around in our area need to transport blood from one city to another. Pilots will volunteer. And the way the organization is structured is we have a small group of staff in Santa Monica, California. We're awesome people to work with. And then we rely on a large number of volunteers. We have, just in the pilot roster alone, we have close to 2,000 pilots who volunteer their time, their aircraft, et cetera, to do these transportations. And then equally important, we have individuals who do ground transportation, including my wife, Jane, who we call Earth Angels. So once the pilots get them to their destination, the Earth Angels will pick them up and take them to hotels or to their appointments and back. And then we couldn't do this, our entire mission, without the support of numerous partners, several airlines that help us with airline miles so we can get people to destinations as well.
Well, 2,000 volunteer pilots, that's a lot. Scale this for us a little bit. Roughly how many missions would you do in a month or a year or something like that?
We typically do, before COVID, around 5,000. And we stopped for a few months during COVID. Then we set up some new procedures, and now we've been doing it since around June 2020 again. And so right now we're around 4,000 missions a year. And we have those pilots are on a roster. We call them command pilots. But a smaller number are active in terms of doing flights. So it varies on how many pilots are active at any one time flying airplanes and helicopters.
And talk about some of the minimal qualifications. If I wanted to fly for AngelFlight, and actually I did many years ago, tell us what you're looking for in terms of pilot qualifications and what process they go through to qualify to fly for you.
Yeah, so what they do, the minimum qualifications is a private pilot license. And then they have to have 250 hours total time and 75 hours cross-country. And so the requirements are, from a pilot experience, we think are quite reasonable. And then we connect them online through our site to do an online orientation course. And it goes through a lot of things about doing public benefit flying, along with some great information from AOPA on that topic. So they go through that process, right? They send us their information about themselves, their pilot license, what airplanes they're going to be flying. If they're going to rent an airplane from a club, we just have to make sure that we know that they have, rental agreements to be able to do those. A number of people fly their own aircraft. And then they go through we call an onboarding process, which, staff at AngelFlight West get all their information, check their pilot credentials, and then they can start flying. If initially when they're new to the program, they can also fly along with another AngelFlight pilot. We call them command pilots once they have all their materials in there. And they can fly with them as a mission assistant if they want to learn the ropes of doing the flights.
And then how do pilots get notified that a flight is available for them to take?
We have a lot of ways to do it. One way to do it is you can do it by text. So we send out a text of flights that are necessary. We also send out email, especially when we're trying to cover a flight that hasn't been covered yet on short notice. And then we also do it through our angelflightwest.org website that then the pilots and Earth Angels will have access to. And it's really cool because you can look for all missions. Let's say you're out of town and say, hey, I'm normally in SoCal, but now I'm in Montana. Is there somebody who needs help? So you can pick those up, or you can, pick airports in your area. Like I'll pick Montgomery, MYF here in San Diego, and find the ones that are regional here. And sometimes I'll go to another airport to pick a patient up. So it's pretty easy to do that process.
And my recollection was that one requirement was that the patients needed to be ambulatory. In other words, they need to be able to get in and out of the aircraft themselves. Is that accurate? And if not, tell us a little bit more about the kinds of appointments and things that these patients might be going to.
Sure. We have a variety. Everybody has to be ambulatory. And so, for example, there'll be children and adults that come for cancer treatment, or that needs to come down for their appointments and then go home. So, and some of those things are really, really important for them for two things. One, their locations for them to be able to actually get transportation to the hospital or their doctor's office is very difficult and time consuming. And also you can imagine after you've been at the doctor's office or a clinic and you've had a treatment, that then the prospect of driving 3 or 4 hours home versus a volunteer pilot and Earth Angel helping you to get home in less than an hour is really advantageous. So we'll do a number of those. We had some really cool program where one of the hospitals here in San Diego was doing cochlear implants. And so there were a number of children that were in eastern San Diego County and Imperial County, and we would transport them back and forth for their appointments. So a variety of flights that come up, and some of our passengers and patients also frequently they'll bring a caregiver with them, especially if a child will come with an adult. Some of those people have been doing it for years for their treatment. It makes all the difference.
Yes, I remember some of the flights that I flew. There was a gentleman who'd had brain cancer, and he needed to go to Stanford every week. And so for 4 weeks, I brought he and his wife via plane, and it would have been about a 3-hour drive for them. And you could tell they were really grateful to, just be able to, drive 10 minutes from Stanford, hop in an airplane, and be home.
Oh, it's amazing. There's a couple of stories. One, I had this young woman, she was in her 20s and had a brain cancer since she was a child. And I transported her from Las Vegas to Central California for her treatment because that's where her doctor was. And it was really nice. I mean, it really made a huge difference in her life. And she was really nervous. So I distracted her a little bit during the flight. And I'm a flight instructor, as you are. And so, I let her sit. She sat up front with me in our Cirrus at that time. And I let her fly and do things. And that just distracted her from her treatment that she had going forward. So you have instances like that, like you said, when you're helping these people who have to go for these recurring treatments, it just makes a world of difference in their lives.
Well, it's certainly a great way for pilots to be able to give something back. Tell us a little bit about your role. I understand you're the safety officer. How did that position come about? And tell us about the safety culture at Angel Flight West.
Well, we've always thought safety was paramount. One thing that we always stress with our pilots is that we are not critical medical transport. So we're there to help ambulatory patients and their caregivers get to their appointments. And they always have to have an alternative, the patients, the transportation case we can't do it. And so that's paramount to me on all these public benefit organizations that do transportation like us. So we never want the pilots to ever feel like they're pressured to get there. We're not an air ambulance. So that's, to me, is one of the most important factors is for the pilots to remember, and we always stress it. So, hey, even if you get to the airport, you got a cloud cover and you're VFR, you can't go, Not a problem at all. You don't think the weather looks good? Not a problem. You have anything questionable about your airplane? Not a problem. You just call the office and they'll take care of it. So the other thing that we did in terms of safety to promote safety at Angel Flight West is we started the position of safety officer. And Jim Dell, who's been a long time command pilot for Angel Flight West, started that. And he started that, and he did that for a while and started to establish, some of our procedures, which are extremely useful. And then I've become the volunteer safety officer now for Angel Flight West. Been doing it for coming up almost 2 years. And what we do so that position is sort of helps coordinate things. I don't do it by myself, no question. We have safety officers and wing leaders in various geographical areas of Angel Flight West, and we work as a team. So they'll help. Some of them will write newsletters that we send out to the pilots and the Earth Angels, and they'll help in their respective areas with new pilots, existing pilots, and so forth if they ever have questions. So it's an entire team. And as safety officer, my whole primary goal is to promote safety of our pilots and, of course, the passengers that they carry. So we will review all the comments that pilots make for every mission. when you complete a mission, you fill out this little feedback report. And so then I can look through all those and see if there are any safety-related issues, any questions of the pilots and so forth that they have during those missions. And then we will try to do some additional education for our pilots. We provide webinars. We've done that in the past. We do in-person meetings that we've had at various wings, and each wing is basically a regional part of the Angel Flight West organization. And that's our goal, is to try to just promote safety as best we can for all the pilots who are doing this volunteer activity.
And tell us about night flights. I understand there was a change made to that sometime a year or so ago. What kind of missions can be done at night? What can't?
Yeah, so what we decided, right, that there's a much higher risk, accident risk, et cetera, at night. And especially with spatial disorientation and loss of control. So what we did, we made the decision that if you want to do a mission at night, you have to be instrument rated and current to do it at night. And we thought that that was a good compromise. We don't require everybody to have an instrument rating, even though we do encourage it. I still think that's the best thing for pilots to have, is to be instrument rated. And so we established that a little bit over a year ago to be able to establish that one requirement.
Now, you had mentioned your partners, including airlines. How do they get involved, for example, if a pilot can't fly a mission, maybe they're not instrument rated and the weather is poor that day?
Sure. What they've done is they've provided us generally a pool of miles, and we have that in our Angel Flight account. And then the mission coordinators will just arrange and booking a flight for the patients. Frequently, we also have pilots who haven't been able to make a flight for one reason or another. They'll actually buy a ticket for some of the patients to get to their destinations. So it's real important. It's been so helpful to have them. In addition, of course, to airline pilots, we have other corporate sponsors that help fund Angel Flight West. We're very proud of some foundations that have awarded Angel Flight West grants for our operating expenses and so forth.
Well, certainly all pilots need to have a plan B anytime they fly, and it sounds like those airline miles kind of give you an instant plan B, in some cases anyway.
Yeah, like we were talking about earlier, we don't want pilots ever to feel pressured. If it doesn't work out, it's starting to get dark, and a patient's appointment is late, and they're not instrument rated, then we say, hey, no problem. We'll put the patient up overnight. We'll figure it out the next day or get them home another way. So the staff is totally understanding of any situations when a flight might have to be canceled or changed. And that's the most important thing, because if you can't do a safe flight and get back home safely to your family and friends and so forth, we just find out that this is so important to push this safety first, and without any compromises whatsoever or second guessing on anyone else's part.
So I want to ask you about a crash that occurred about 3 years ago, and certainly we're both very familiar with it, as it happened at my home airport of Palo Alto. It was a fatal crash. It was the first one that I ever remember hearing for Angel Flight West that was fatal. Tell us a little bit about that crash, and then tell us about kinds of changes that may have been made in the wake of that crash.
Yeah, that was sad. There was a command pilot with 2 passengers on board, and he had done over 100 missions for Angel Flight. So it's not like he was a new pilot. And he sadly perished in the crash. The passengers were injured, but they survived. It's interesting because you can look at the NTSB report, and he became sort of disoriented for situational awareness of Palo Alto, as you probably remember, Max, right? And he touched down way down the runway. So he's coming in too fast. And then on the go-around was when the accident occurred. So our procedures haven't changed in response to that. There was nothing in our procedures that would have really had an impact on that accident and through the investigation process. But we've also just still reiterated what we've done before, safety. In this particular case, if you look at the NTSB accident data, and the NAL report is awesome, you'll see a lot of accidents happen from go-arounds because people don't practice them enough, right? As a professional pilot. And so if you look at the accidents, While only about 16% of the accidents, fatal accidents, are because of loss of control, 90% of those are fatal. So it's huge. It's huge. It's incredible to see those numbers. And so he, it appeared, from the NTSB data, he was on a stabilized approach. So we promote that. And I see that, not even focusing on this accident in particular, but, stabilized approaches are important. Pilots sometimes come in too fast, and because they think it's safer coming in faster, and generally it's not. It just takes up more runway. And Palo Alto, as you know, is a short runway. So it was sad. Yeah, we didn't, as I mentioned, we didn't change really any of our procedures based on that because there wasn't anything that would have probably changed that. It was just how the pilot erred, sadly.
Right. And I just want to add a couple of things to it. In terms of situational awareness, he was on a base entry to 1-3, which meant he was coming across the bay and there were clouds there. And so those clouds obscured his view of the airport until the last second. He did cross through the final before he finally spotted the airport. So he overshot and then got back on final. I do understand that he landed long. But the key thing, and this really fascinated me, was that when he did the go-around, he didn't follow the procedure for the Moony aircraft that he was flying. And that aircraft was relatively new to him. It said it he had 38 hours total make and model in that particular aircraft. And everything I've read suggests that the accident rates decline after people have about 100 hours in type. So I always encourage people, get that first 100 hours in a new model is safely, and you got to kind of gradually expand the envelope of what you do in those airplanes until you get 100 hours of experience. But he didn't follow the POH procedure for a go-around. And the issue was that he essentially retracted his flaps too quickly, and he was too slow. And it reminds me of an SR20 accident that occurred in Houston, in which the lady had been making multiple attempts to land at the airport at Houston. ATC kept sending her around because there were 737s in front of her, behind her, and so on. And she was too slow when she retracted the flaps. And in both cases, the stall speed increased as the flaps were retracted, and pilots essentially caused their own stall just by raising the flaps when they were too slow.
Yeah, and that was sad, especially in Houston, because as you mentioned, she had to do several different airport or runway changes, right? So she's coming into a busy airport. They keep on changing the runway on her, and she gets distracted. And it's true, like for go-arounds, when I teach in aircraft from singles up through business jets, I practice go-arounds all the time. When I fly and also when I'm teaching, right? So it's flap gear flaps, right? If you have you take it out of the landing flaps, you leave the rest of the flaps in exactly for that reason. You approach your takeoff flaps so that the stall speed doesn't change so dramatically, and then you get the gear, you clean up. Once you cleaned up everything, then you bring up the flaps. And you see that, and I encourage people to practice go-arounds themselves. I'll go up even in my Eclipse or any plane I have and just go around the pattern and just do go-arounds. Just drill that in of what that process is. And so that people can remember that, because that's, as you look at the now report statistics, the go-arounds can be a really critical phase of flight that some people underestimate.
Yes, and go-arounds are such a nice solution for virtually any problem that you have when you're landing. You really want to be able to do those easily and correctly. Now, that was interesting. There was one extra step in there, and just looking at the NTSB report here, procedure said full power, liftoff at 65 knots, retraction of flaps to the takeoff setting once climb is established, and then retrim the pitch before then doing landing gear retraction and then the final flap retraction. And they noted to minimize control wheel forces doing a go-around, timely nose-down trimming is recommended to counteract nose-up pitching moment as power is increased or flap retraction. And I think we've both seen this in all types of airplanes. If you're trimmed at landing speed and you add full power, boy, the airplane is going to pitch up a lot. And then when you remove part of your flaps, the pitch is going to change again. So, yeah, this is probably not as easy a maneuver as most people think it is, and it requires practice.
Yeah, and you'll see that, from my experience, you'll see that nose-up trim more in singles than you do in the higher-powered the jets, for example, the business jets, right? There's very little trim sometimes you have to adjust in a citation when you do a go-around. But on the singles, frequently, especially if you have an aircraft that has a heavy nose like the 206 that we just purchased, is you really trim it back so that you don't have that nose hit first, especially if no one's in the back. So when you have to do a go-around, you've got to put that nose pitch trim in to lower the nose. Otherwise, you'll be in a bad situation. Yeah, it's sad, when that happens, when any accident happens, especially when a life is lost, coming in and you got low clouds and you make that wrong decision at that point.
Well, let's change gears slightly here and talk about something a little more fun and a little more uplifting.
Sure.
Tell us about the summer camp program and some of your experience flying kids for that program.
Oh, it's amazing, as we were talking about before the podcast, right? So Angel Flight, we not only take patients to and from and their caregivers to and from appointments. We transport blood. We did PPE. We did many, many tons of PPE during COVID when we couldn't fly passengers. We carried tremendous amounts, especially in the Southwest, to some of the Native American reservations. And then what we also do, which is really cool, we did more of them before COVID, and they're starting to pick back up, is we take recovering patients, or some of them fully recovered, to summer camps. And most of them, they're children and they're young adults, or they're counselors. And so we do several. We do one in particular is one for children and adults who've been severely burned. So we take them to these camps and they spend a week or so just being together with other people in their similar situation and just having a lot of fun. And then we also do other ones for children and young adults who are hard of hearing. And one in particular that I really enjoyed, just had a lot of fun with, was flying up, picking up some children. They're all hard of hearing, mostly fully hearing impaired, and picked them up at an airport in Central California. And so what I did is I made written sort of briefing cards for each one of them so that they could, clearly understand how to get out of the airplane. And I showed them all, and so they understood. And then one of their siblings, this young lady, she was like, maybe 8 years old. I recruited her as a flight attendant, and so she helped me translate with sign language to the children in the back, and it was nice. It was wonderful. It's wonderful to land, see their parents who are entrusting these children to myself and a mission assistant, and we took off in the CJ3 and took them to a camp that sort of brightened their life. So it was fun. Those are nice events. All of them are nice.
Well, it sounds like it brightens your life, too. So in a sense, pilots aren't just helping others, but aren't you getting something from this as well, too?
Oh, absolutely. I love doing public benefit flying. I've done a lot of work down in Haiti after the earthquake, about 30-some-odd flights for that. Down into Mexico, we just did Hurricane Ida, my wife and I. And to me, it's the most enjoyable flying there is. You're helping somebody. You're doing something you love. We always say, boy, we want to go fly out for $100 hamburger. And it's more expensive now, as we know, than $100. And as a reason to go fly, and you help people because we, with all the hours that you and I have and other pilots listening here, the joy of being able to fly and to see this beautiful Earth from above, to see different vistas that you'll never see even in an airline, right? And then to bring these individuals that not only help them get to their destination, but also give them an experience that they may never have had before. So, yeah, I think it brings a lot of personal comfort and joy to me when we're helping people do this. And not just the pilots, but the Earth Angels, like my wife, Jane, does the ground transportation. It's just a wonderful thing to do.
Well, it's also potentially going to take you to airports that you might not ever go to otherwise. Another Angel Flight West flight that I did was into the Happy Camp Airport, which is very, very tiny, buried down a steep valley. Literally, the mountains around there go up at least 6,000-7,000 feet. It's a one-way runway, one way in, one way out. And I took a Twin Seneca into that 2,500-foot strip, knowing that, hey, if you're going to go around, you're going to have to start before you even reach the numbers because it's one way. So So, I think we as pilots also derive a lot of benefits, from these kinds of things as well. So for people who might be interested in exploring, joining Angel Flight West, where would they go for more information?
Our website, angelflightwest.org, and it has information right there, right for pilots and everything that they need to do. And then they go through the process. They contact the staff, and they can answer any of the questions. And I'm always available. Anybody has any questions about Angel Flight. And the cool thing is, and this isn't the primary reason people do it, but it's deductible. It's a charitable contribution. So if you rent a plane, right, you've got that tax implications of writing off that rental. If you own a plane, at the very least, you can deduct the fuel. And like your experience in Palo Alto, right, at 2,400, that gave you great experience to go into Happy Camp, right?
Totally.
And so all those things are just, like you said, you get to go places you may never have thought of going. And to see the smile on their faces that helps them, or the emails and the thank yous, and it's really nice. And, everybody's appreciative of that. And like I said, if any questions, the Angel Flight staff is a great resource, and we're happy to be there to help anybody.
Well, Angel Flight West is definitely a feel-good type organization. Thanks so much for taking time to talk with us today.
You're welcome. Thank you for having us on your show, Max. This is awesome.
And my thanks to Rich for joining us today and talking about Angel Flight West. You can learn more about them at angelflightwest.org, and I'll include a link to their site in the show notes. Coming up next, your questions and emails, right here on the Aviation News Talk podcast. And let's start out with some good news. Our new mega supporter, Bob Recall, recently passed his instrument rating, so congratulations, Bob. And Patreon supporter Patricia Burris passed her instrument rating as well. Congratulations, Patricia. And we've got an email from her we'll get to later on. Finally, PayPal supporter Francis Rose writes, I passed my private pilot check ride yesterday. Hey, congratulations, Francis. And now here's a question from Chris.
Hey, good morning, Max. My name is Chris. I'm listening to the podcast for probably about 3 years, and I've found it incredibly useful as I work through my private, instrument, commercial, and currently working in my CFI now. My current question comes pursuant to a long cross-country I just took over some areas of IFR, and I was contemplating the best way to handle an engine-out force landing over areas of either IFR or marginal VFR weather. I figured as an instructor in training, it'd be good to know this information, and found it lacking my education thus far. So I'd be curious to hear how you would handle, or maybe some of your experts would handle, a forced landing over an IFR airport where maybe you perhaps cannot make a VFR airport, and maybe you can't pull the parachute because your airplane doesn't have a parachute. And what the best procedures and protocols would be where you couldn't traditionally fly an ILS, for example, because your glide range wouldn't make it. So that's my question for today. Thanks for entertaining it, and thanks again for the podcast. Take care.
Chris, great question, and I agree there's not much written on this subject, which kind of leaves it up to pilots to figure it out for themselves, which is not the best strategy. Let me approach this from a couple different directions. First, let's assume that you're not able to make it to an airport. How would you descend down through the clouds over uncertain, hostile terrain? I would probably slow the aircraft back to at least best glide, and I might even go a little bit slower. I might slow down to the approach speed that I would use on final for landing, and I would be configured pretty much for landing, and I'd have at least half the flaps, if not all the flaps, because if we were to break out of the clouds really close to the ground, I'd like to be as slow as possible and fully configured for touchdown. Now, if you were able to make it to an airport and you were still on top or maybe even in the clouds, for sure you're going to want to be at a height at the final approach fix of an instrument approach that's at least double what you would be if you were flying that approach for normal. So typically the last segment of an instrument approach probably has about a 3-degree glide slope. You're going to need probably at least a 6-degree glide slope in order to make it with a failed engine. Now, you can find out for your particular aircraft what kind of descent rate that you have. Just take a look at when you're flying at best glide speed, see what kind of descent rate that you get, and then basically calculate the number of feet per nautical mile that you're going to be descending at that speed. And so, for example, a normal 3-degree glide slope at 90 knots is going to produce a descent rate of about 320 feet per nautical mile. If you were at 90 knots, that would be about 500 feet per minute. So if I could get to the final approach fix at double the altitude required, that's probably where I would go. If I couldn't be at that height, then I'd want to intercept the final at some point inside the final approach fix, where I'm approximately double the height required at that particular point, so that my roughly 6-degree glide would make it to the airport. Now, of course, if you have a moving map and GPS, that helps tremendously, because now you can identify the distances and set yourself for an intercept at an appropriate point on the approach. Now, that's the strategy I would use if the clouds were relatively low at my destination. If I had higher ceilings, let's just say at least 1,000 feet, and I was going to break out above 1,000 feet above the ground, I might fly directly to the numbers and then just kind of circle as I descend down through the clouds. When I break out at 1,000 feet, then I would just fly an abbreviated pattern to the runway. Hope that helps, and good luck with your CFI. I'm sure you'll be a great instructor because you're already thinking about some of these tough questions. And here's an email from Bernhard in Austria, in Österreich. So thank you, Bernhard. He says, regarding non-specialized headsets, he says the basic idea is that you take either a Bose 700 QC35 1 or 2 or Sony WH100 XM3 or XM4, which are consumer noise cancellation headsets that don't have a microphone. And then you go to avee.no, and they can provide an adapter, a mic adapter for this specific model. He says, I bought it a couple of years ago and I love it, and I'm really happy with it and can strongly recommend it. They also provide a really cool Bluetooth adapter. And yes, one of my clients did exactly that with one of the QC35 headsets. So that's an inexpensive way to convert a consumer headset and add a microphone to it so that you can use it in the cockpit. I'll include a link in the show notes to that site. And also, there's another company which sells these. This is the one that my client Chen bought his from. It's uflymic.com, Mike being spelled M-I-K-E. And Bernhard continues his email by saying, if you do not already know, check out this great tool which provides so many weather-related information. I'm sure you'll love it. And of course, he's talking about Windy, windy.com. A number of folks have mentioned that to me in the past. He says under plugins, they also offer a lightweight router planner. So thanks so much for that, Bernhard. And here's a message from mega supporter Jim Goldfuss, which came to me via Facebook Messenger. He says, on a recent podcast, you mentioned the soccer player killed in a plane crash on a flight to Wales, and the autopsy revealed a high level of CO, or carbon monoxide, in his system. He says, I'm a soon-to-be CFI. His check rides on January 6th. It got me thinking that with the amount of time I'm going to be spending in small planes, older ones too, and with the winter coming, colder weather, the use of heaters, he said, I went to Sporty's and I found a well-reviewed mid-range personal CO monitor I could attach to my flight bag. I got it this past Saturday. Well, on Monday, I taxied out in a plane I use regularly and that is well-maintained. We did the run-up, and when the throttle was brought to idle and I was about to do the takeoff emergency brief, we both paused, looked at each other, and said, what's that alarm? We checked our phones, wondered if it was bleeding through the radio or a funky ELT, but then I wondered if it was the CO monitor on my flight bag. And when I pulled it up, sure enough, it was going off an alarm. It was in the lower end of the warning range, but the engine was just warming up and we were off to do touch and goes, so there would have been a lot of power changes and a good period of time at takeoff power, so I don't know if that number would have climbed even higher. Needless to say, the doors were open, we taxied back. He says there's no way to say what would have happened had I not gotten the detector or left it off. Maybe nothing, or maybe a lot more. I know there's no way to eliminate all risk in flying. It's a hazard of the activity we all love to engage in, but it's through podcasts like yours, reading magazines and articles, participating in the FAA Wings program that keep us in the game and keep us safely at the forefront and try to assure that every takeoff is eventually followed by an uneventful planned landing. Thank you for all you do and the work you put into your podcast. I'm glad I heard the story about carbon monoxide because it got me considering CO and got me to take action and quite possibly save my instructors and my life. And he did follow up with me and told me that the mechanics found that there was a loose shroud, which is what provides the heat into the cabin, and apparently that's where the CO leak was coming in. Also, I want to mention that we've talked about CO in depth in episodes 88 and 90. So if you want to learn more about carbon monoxide poisoning, go out to aviationnewstalk.com/88 or /90. And I just bought a new CO detector myself a couple of weeks ago. You really want to get one of the ones that costs probably at least $120 or $130, because these are the most accurate, and the cheap CO detectors that you might buy for your house, they just don't alarm until the CO level is extremely high, so you don't want to use them in an airplane. Now, Jim mentioned that the plane he was in is well maintained, but remember, even a single backfire when starting a plane can damage your exhaust system and start leaking CO into the cabin. So don't be complacent just because your airplane is well maintained. Do buy a CO monitor and use it on every flight. And here's a message from Phil via Facebook Messenger. He says, I'm a private pilot from Perth, Western Australia. I'm a tradesman in roofing, and I listen to your podcast while I'm on the roof all day. I have a young family, a son 2.5 years old, and I'm really excited to introduce him to flying. Any episodes to help? If not, that would be a great topic for a podcast. Kids and toddlers flying with them. Keep up your great work, and I've adapted a lot of your podcast advice and ideas into my own flying. Thanks. And I wrote back, hi, Phil, thanks for your message. First, congratulations on having a 2-year-old. These are fun, exciting years. And I told him I'm not aware of any podcast episodes that are geared toward really young children of that age. This show tends to skew toward more advanced topics. Now, I would think that at that age, taking him to an airport and watching airplanes fly around might be an even more stimulating experience than listening to a podcast, but I don't really know for sure. You might also look at some of the airport and airplane toys that are available, like I think Legos sells an airport set and things like that. So thanks for your email, Phil. And here's an email from Patreon supporter Patricia Burris. She says, I passed my instrument check ride on Tuesday. Your podcast was instrumental in preparing me for the exam, especially episode 129, the IFR instrument mock check ride. Thank you. I was able to exercise my new privilege a couple of days later, leaving KEDC back to KADS. A thin layer of clouds at 500 feet would have kept me grounded before this week. However, I was cleared for my instrument departure and took off, making it back in time for an afternoon federal hearing. I'm committed to continuing learning to become a better and safer pilot, and that includes listening to your podcast and always refreshing with your G1000 and Perspective Handbook. Have I mentioned that my husband and I bought a G5 SR22 last year, and Anise Shapiro is my CFII. Now, we talked with Anise on this show in episode 175, and she told us about the engine out emergency that she had. And Patricia winds up by saying, anyhow, thank you for what you do and keeping us safe. Best to you and your family, and happy holidays. Patricia, thanks so much. And again, congratulations on your instrument rating. And here's an email from Patreon supporter Christian Derzidan. He says, hi, Max. Have you been able to have Lightspeed change your GA plugs to LEMO? How much did it cost? And Chris, I did get my Zulu 3 headset back. The cost was exactly $150, which included FedEx shipping to return the unit to me. Besides replacing the control box, the cables, and the connectors, they also replace all of the soft goods, so the ear cups and the soft head pad. Since I knew they'd be replacing the soft goods, I just pulled mine off before sending in the unit, as mine were only a couple of months old since I just replaced them. And I've used the updated headset a couple times since then, and it works great. Now, I wish I'd made the change a few years ago, and I'm really looking forward to not having to constantly change batteries, since they need to be replaced about every 25 hours, which means I'm doing about 20 changes per year. So that's worked out really well. And here's an email message from Patreon supporter Victor Cabrales. He says, I'm honored to be able to support the show. You've been pivotal to the success of my pilot dreams alongside my CFI, Troy Takao. I fly a 1975 172 out of Kissimmee, Florida, and will pursue my IFR rating within the next few months. I'll keep you up to date on my progress. It's been an amazing journey, and I've been loving every minute of it. I learned something from every single episode you produce and deeply appreciate all your work. Well, Victor, thanks so much for that. I appreciate that, and also thanks for taking the time to support the show. Here's a message from Tom in Florida. He says, summary for episode 210 says, about this episode 210 CFIT, uncontrolled flight into terrain. He says, don't you mean controlled, not uncontrolled? Oops, so yes, I certainly do. I had it right everywhere except in the description for that episode, so I went in and fixed it. So thanks to you, Tom, and one other person who let me know about that error. And I got an email from someone who was talking about episode 209, where I discussed CFIT accidents. He said he believed that the pilot suffered from fuel exhaustion rather than that being a CFIT accident. And I wrote back to him, I said, I totally agree with you. I now believe it was fuel exhaustion as well. When I first looked at the ADS-B data, I thought that pilot crashed while level, but later I realized the data stopped 20 minutes before the accident. Now, the NTSB report shows him descending at the very end of the flight from 500 AGL to 200 feet AGL just before the crash, which now convinces me that it was fuel exhaustion. And I will add this, while the pilot was flying at just 500 AGL when he was still more than 10 miles from the airport and still had a low ridge in front of him, I would say had he been higher, as I believe he should have been, he would have had more time to deal with what now appears to be a fuel exhaustion accident. And here's an email from Kenny in Colorado. He writes, Max, really enjoying your podcast. Your most recent CFIT topic reminded me of another unfortunate and avoidable CFIT crash that happened recently. My theory is automation caused this one as well. I was on approach to Centennial Airport, runway 35 right in Colorado a few months ago, and a G1000 Evolution crashed into the power lines and rising terrain right in front of me. Here's my theory, and regardless if it's true or not, it's a good lesson on understanding your avionics. On the G1000, and by the way, this is true for many GPSs, if you activate approach, frankly not sure why this option is in the avionics, he says, when you're inside the IAF, the autopilot thinks that you want to start the approach over again and will turn you outbound back to the IAF. Unfortunately, this has happened to me in actual conditions, and I believe this is precisely what caused the CFIT of the Evolution. If you listen to the ATC, you'll hear the pilot was on approach, then suddenly did a 180-degree turn outbound with a radio call, having trouble with my autopilot. If distracted inside, he would have never seen the rising terrain and wires that lie a few miles south of Centennial. The lesson, never use activate approach. Either go direct to a fix inside the approach, which automatically activates the approach, or activate vectors to final, all depending upon ATC instructions. Appreciate all you do for GA. Kenny, I totally agree. We had an accident that looked just like that in 2003 when a Cirrus was on approach into the Reed Hillview Airport. And unfortunately, he started to make a 90-degree turn in the middle of the approach, and most of us kind of guessed the same thing. He had activate approach, and the airplane started a U-turn back to start the approach over again, but he descended into rising terrain. So yes, I almost never use the activate approach command. Most of the time, I load an approach. Then when I'm ready to start the approach, I put the cursor on whatever fix I want to go to, and then I hit direct enter. Or I do as you said, which is activate vectors to final. And I frankly almost never use the activate approach command. And here's an email from Jeff in Texas. He says, hi, just came across your podcast and made a PayPal donation. I got my private and instrument rating all this year at age 55 when I decided, why not? Hey, congratulations to you, Jeff. That's great. One of the best things about flying when not in a plane is the community and the opportunities for constant learning. I've never been a podcast person, as many have good content that is poorly organized and delivered. Yours, however, is quite the opposite. I enjoy the structure, content, and delivery. I'm looking forward to working my way back through your episodes. Thanks for all you do. Thank you, Jeff. And this comes from Mega supporter Greg Campbell. He says, hi, Max. Thanks so much for the signed copy of your G1000 book. Now, that's something I send to our supporters who donate $50 a month after 2 months. He says, I already have a copy of that book that I'll give to a friend and keep the signed copy for myself. I did get my DA40NG back in the air briefly, but unfortunately this week, another service bulletin dropped regarding the high-pressure fuel pump. In my case, it looks like a complete replacement will now be performed, which requires getting a mechanic up to my home base in Ottawa. On the plus side, I'm making great progress on the instrument rating ground school. Hopefully the service bulletin will not impact your club's DA42, which, by the way, it doesn't. I understand the aircraft was built after that service bulletin came into effect. As always, thanks for the awesome podcast. I'm still working my way through old episodes and learning a ton. Hearing experienced pilots talk and starting to understand their mindset has been key to my becoming a more professional pilot. Greg, thanks so much for your email and also for your Patreon support. And here's an email from Patreon supporter Andre Dynon. He says, hi, Max. If you're going to mount your new GoPro outside the plane, please double mount it to 2 different points. One of them must be bomb-proof. For example, you may use a sticky pad to mount a camera in a way you want a shot angle to be, and tie it to a strut at the same time in case the glue fails and the camera flies off. Well, good news, Andre. My club doesn't permit mounting anything on the outside of the airplane, so I won't be doing that, but certainly good advice. And here's an email from Pete in Ohio. He says, Max, recently discovered your podcast and immediately picked out episode 187 on hearing loss. I was flying professionally with hearing aids since 1985 and finally voluntarily left my Part 121 career, that would be an airline job, in 1997 due to problems hearing in the cockpit. After 2 other careers outside of aviation, I was able to get a cochlear implant in 2010. I just wanted to put in my 2 cents worth since I was told by the FAA in Oklahoma City that I could not get a first class with a cochlear implant. Long story short, I actually got my first class back And I believe many pilots probably don't think a first class is possible with severe hearing loss, but that is not true. Cochlears are 100 times better than hearing aids for me. Love the show. Thanks. Well, Pete, that's a great story. Thanks so much for sharing that, because hearing loss is something that really affects pilots more than the general population. So great to hear that you could still get your first class. And here's an email from Aaron in California. He says, "Hi, Max. I hope you can address the reasons behind the recent increase in prices for used aircraft. I'm a student pilot. I'm a student of Troy Bainbridge's, who is one of your mega supporters. I'm in the process of trying to buy my own airplane, but prices for GA aircraft are threatening to price me out of the market if I want anything safe and reliable. I make a good living as a physician, and I'm still shocked by prices I see out there. Maybe you could shed some light on the situation. Thanks for your show. I always learn something." And Aaron, it's so true that things have changed dramatically in the last couple of years. If you look prior to sometime around the year 2000, used aircraft prices used to steadily increase about maybe 1% per year. That all changed approximately 20 years ago, and then they started going down. And then it reversed really at the beginning of the pandemic, and prices have shot up dramatically, really for two different reasons. One is that if you go back 3-4 years ago, there was an increase in demand for pilots from the airlines, and so there was a greater demand for training aircraft, and so prices of 172s and aircraft such as that started increasing. But during the pandemic, a lot of people have decided they would much prefer to learn to fly and fly their own airplane rather than fly on the airlines. And so this has really driven up demand for both new aircraft and used aircraft, and the prices have really gone through the roof. I've heard lots of stories of people who bought an airplane a year ago and were able to sell it for even more than they purchased it for. So all I can say is you might as well jump into the market sooner than later. And here's an email from John in the UK. He says, "Hi, Max. I'm a student pilot in England, and I'm finding useful information as I listen back through your shows. I'd love to have a chance to experience bush flying one day, but for now I'm driving a truck, and your shows help pass the time. One interesting thing I've noticed in learning to fly is the similarities between this and driving a truck. For example, pre-trip inspections, journey planning, fuel weather planning, load security, and so on. I hope that helps me in the future. Anyway, keep up the great work, and hopefully there's plenty more for me to learn." John, I think that's a really great analogy, and I will say that I think my driving has gotten better as a result of being a very careful pilot. I think that anytime we take the discipline that we learn in flying and apply it to other things around us, for example, the medical community has started using checklists largely based on their success in aviation. But anytime we learn these new things and apply them to other areas, we can do better by applying the discipline that we use as pilots. Here's a message from Patreon supporter Jeff Willis. He says, "Max, I just want to tell you how much I enjoy your podcast. I'm a private instrument-rated pilot working on my commercial, as well as an aircraft owner, a PA-28. In truth, I should have gotten around to becoming a supporter much earlier than now. I certainly get more than $20 a month of value from the content you provide. It is obvious that you are passionate about aviation safety, and I applaud what you are doing with the podcast. Keep it up." Well, thanks so much for that, Jeff, and I greatly appreciate your support, and I appreciate the support of everyone who supports the show in whatever way they choose to do that. Now, take a moment and see if you know any of these people, and if you do, tell them you heard their name on the show. First, I want to thank a couple new mega supporters. Bob Bracall has passed his private and instrument rating this past year and is about to start his commercial, and he's signed up at the $50 a month level. Thank you, Bob. Victor Cabrales edited his pledge up to $50 a month. Thank you so much, Victor. And Rob Thomas just edited his pledge up to $50 a month. We also have some new Patreons who've joined us. Mark Knockenhauer. Interestingly, I used to work with his cousin many years ago. He's at $20 a month. Ted Stinson, $35 a month. Kristen Durzadon at $20 a month. Mike and Kevin E., $8 a month. David S. Johnson edited his pledge up to $35 a month. And Michael Rose at $20 a month. And finally, William Remington edited his pledge up to $20 a month. Thanks so much, especially to people who have decided to increase their support as time goes on. We also have a new PayPal monthly supporter. That's Aspen Aerospace Technologies. And you're probably familiar with Aspen. They make the innovative instruments that you can use as drop-in replacements for the gyro instruments in your aircraft to get some glass into the cockpit of older aircraft. And we also had some one-time donations. I want to thank Douglas Pegg, who donated $100. He says, "Thanks for your continued work in providing interesting and valuable information and insights to help make us better pilots and keep us safe." Cody Mattiello, $15. John Loomis Jr., $25. Jeffrey Schlegel, $20. Linda Morris, $150. Francis Rose, $100. John Johnson, $60, who says happy holidays and thanks for the great content. And finally, Louis Abuscal, $50. And if you'd like to support the show, it's really easy to do. It'll take you 2 to 3 minutes. Just go out to aviationnewstalk.com/awesome, enter your credit card information, and you can make a monthly donation via Patreon. Or if you'd like to make either a monthly donation or just a one-time donation, go out to aviationnewstalk.com/PayPal. And I'd love to hear from you, so if you'd like to send an email, just head on out to aviationnewstalk.com, click on Contact at the top of the page, and you can send your email. And if you have a question, boy, I'd really love it if you would record it for me. It's really easy to do. Just go out to aviationnewstalk.com, click on Listener Questions, and that'll take you to our SpeakPipe app, where you can click and record directly from your smartphone and leave us a question. So until next time, fly safely, have fun, and keep the blue side up.